Great Depression and the Great Recession has had an outstanding impact in our nation's history. In 1929, a severe worldwide economic depression known as the Great Depression began. The Great Depression lasted until the late 1920s to the early 1940s. The Depression started in the U.S. in September of 1929 with a decline in the stock market that later collapsed on October 29, 1929. The Great Depression was the longest economic downturn. It began when the stock markets crashed on October in 1929. The crash of the New York Exchange signaled the beginning of the Great Depression. Consumer spending and investment dropped, which made everything worse since supply and demand weren't correlating, also causing rising levels of unemployment. Companies laid off workers, and by 1933, about 13 to 15 million people were unemployed. As jobs were lost, people could not afford to make payments on items bought with credit. The unemployment rate in the United States rose, and the GDP declined by almost 33%. Over 9,000 banks failed during the 1930s. It was like a domino effect, where the deposits were uninsured and people began to lose their savings. People began to panic when they found out about how hundreds of banks were closing. By 1939, World War II bumped the economy into high gear, creating many jobs in factories and manufacturing. The Second World War helped to employ over 12 million of the 15 million people that were unemployed. The mass spending on guns, planes, etc. helped create jobs, but dug the economy into a deeper debt. The economy recovered from the Depression only with the advent of World War II, which pushed the demand for goods and services to a limit of its capacity. The Great Recession was from December in 2007 through January of 2009. It began with the burst of an $8 trillion housing bubble. The real gross domestic product fell 4.3% from its peak in 2007 to its lowest point in 2009. With consumer spending and in business investment drying up, massive job loss followed. Before the Great Recession, the unemployment rate was 5%, and during the recession, it rose a dramatic 9.5%. The unemployment rates caused mass crisis because of the amount of how many people were being laid off. As the financial crisis and the recession deepened, measures intended to revive the economic growth were implemented on a global basis. The United States, like many other nations, enacted a fiscal stimulus programs that used different combinations of government spending and tax cuts. These programs included the Economic Stimulus Act of 2008 and the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009. The Great Recession are the results of the falling demand and inflation. Inflation was one of the biggest causes because there was an increase in prices of goods, so the higher the rate of the prices, the less people are buying. By the summer of 2009, the real gross domestic product and industrial production hit rock bottom and resumed growth and expansion in both measures strengthened as the year ended. Industrial production has continued to grow in early 2010, thus ending the Great Recession. When comparing the recession to the Great Depression, there are many similarities and differences. The Depression and the recession were both preceded by rapid credit expansion and financial innovation that led to higher leverage.